Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Hyperscale Servers Ride Cloud Momentum into the Enterprise, outlining the recent results of our hyperscale research. I'm Allison Crawford, and I'll be your host for today's presentation. As cloud-driven computing concepts continue to trickle into the enterprise market, competition will increase among hyperscale server vendors. TBR estimates a $1.7 billion U.S. addressable market in the next 12 months for hyperscale servers among organizations with 500 or more employees. According to our research, nearly one-third of hyperscale server enterprise adopters are replacing traditional server hardware with hyperscale servers. Over the course of this presentation, Senior Analyst Christian Perry will cover the drivers impacting this market, followed by Q&A of these trends and how they'll affect you. Before Christian gets started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, we're recording today's session and we'll be posting it to our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Christian will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out either to Christian or myself at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/tbr_market_insight. And we'll share all the social media links again at the end of the conversation. Now let me introduce Senior Analyst Christian Perry on the computing team here at TBR. Christian leads our data center research team and is spearheading our hyperscale and converged infrastructure initiatives. His insight into the operation and competitive strategies of data center vendors helps our clients improve their strategic go-to-market plans and performance. And with that, let me hand this over to Christian.
Thanks so much, Allison, and thank you all for joining. Glad you're here. And what I'd like to do today is to share some insights from our research that we performed this year on hyperscale servers, and to share some insights as well around what we see happening in this market. We think that this is a quickly growing market and a market that holds plenty of opportunities for, of course, not only ODMs, but OEMs in the traditional enterprise space as well. Before I dive in, let me just, we get a lot of questions about how we define hyperscale servers. So the way that we look at hyperscale and hyperscale servers are those, it's simple from our standpoint. It's servers that are designed to scale exponentially, so whether that's single-digit server installations or thousands of servers in tandem with increased demand, without substantially increasing or impacting data center physical infrastructure, such as space, cooling, and electrical power. So these are server deployments that are relatively simple in deployment, relatively simple to manage at scale, and can save substantially in infrastructure costs over time compared to traditional infrastructure. When we went into the field, we spoke with, we had 284 completed surveys, and we talked to customers at organizations with 500 or more employees. This research just published a couple months ago, and what we wanted to do, we wanted to look at what was happening out there in the market. We do this across our converged systems research as well. We wanted to do that here with Hyperscale, and we found some interesting things that are happening. We do know that there is a big push for change in customer environments driven by a lot of complexity, and as a result, we know that enterprise IT customers are indeed seeking alternatives to traditional infrastructure, not to completely replace it. We don't feel that that's going to happen anytime soon, if at all. But they are looking to bring in change for certain workloads and to try different types of infrastructure, because what they're dealing with now simply is not satisfying their needs, and that's both IT needs and business needs from a complete perspective. Those enterprise hyperscale server adopters are coming away pretty darn satisfied with what they have in their environments, and as a result, they plan to adopt and deploy more of these servers moving forward. So the experiences are positive. However, there are still challenges that remain. We do see the sweet spot for hyperscale still existing in cloud, but as those opportunities trickle down into the enterprise, which we did expect would happen at some point, we see it's now happening a little bit more quickly than we originally anticipated. As that trickle-down effect continues to occur, we do see some challenges from vendors selling into the enterprise on the hyperscale space, and I will talk to some of those challenges. So Allison did mention that we do see a $1.7 billion U.S. addressable market through next June for hyperscale servers. And there is certainly an opportunity in the enterprise space, and we do think that a lot of the drivers between hyperscale and the enterprise are occurring in cloud. So, customers realize that there are other ways to do things now outside of traditional servers, blade and rack, and whether that's cloud, public cloud services, whether that's private cloud, there are other ways to do things in ways that don't bring all the pains of complexity that traditional infrastructure brings. And when you blend that with the, all the awareness being driven out of the very large cloud data centers, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, we know that enterprise customers want a similar type of computing experience, depending on the workloads that they run in their own environments. So now we do see at least awareness being driven in the enterprise around hyperscale, and to some extent deployments as well. This is still a very small segment of the overall server market, but we do expect moving forward over the next 3 to 5 years that it's going to ramp up relatively quickly at the expense of traditional blade architecture. We don't feel that blade architecture is going away. It's still going to be there for mission critical workloads. But for other type of workloads, and I'll talk about some of those workloads that we see being experimented with on hyperscale, that's going to be an area of opportunity for hyperscale. So the hyperscale server value proposition, we see it as being fairly simple. Simply put, I talked about some of that awareness and some of that, some of the publicity simply coming out of the Open Compute project, coming out of cloud data centers. These are data centers that run like a very well-oiled machine. That's not realistic for most enterprise data centers. However, when a new workload is deployed or a workload is expanded, the requirements are expanded around that workload, now we have data center customers and buyers looking at hyperscale as a potential way to decrease complexity that would, more complexity would enter the environment as they deploy more hardware to accommodate those workloads or those growing workload requirements. And now, depending on the vertical, whether it's education or financial services, now we see customers looking at hyperscale, looking to things like Moonshot as a potential replacement for some of that more complex hardware or hardware that's more complex to manage. And then over time, it's not just the ease of managing at large scale, but it's also the potential cost savings depending on the size of the deployment. That's on the enterprise side. That's kind of where some of the challenges are coming in, and I'll talk to some of those in the coming slides. So I did talk about the sweet spot for hyperscale. We still see the sweet spot existing in cloud and in cloud data centers. We feel that is, although that was the initial intended application for hyperscale servers, we do feel that certainly enterprise is an emerging opportunity for hyperscale and will grow rather substantially over time as portfolios are built. from OEMs, and even as ODMs grow a little more aggressive in terms of selling direct to enterprises, we don't feel that that's a threat that's imminent, but we think that that's certainly on the radar because, again, that opportunity is going to grow and widen over time. But if we look at that ecosystem between cloud and enterprise, we see some distinct differences between what cloud data centers want and need and what drives their hyperscale services, and what enterprise customers want and need and what drives their purchases. But there are things, when we talk to customers out there in the field, we see certainly shared benefits that they target for, when they look at hyperscale. And those are things, of course, like easily scalable architecture, simplicity, and that's, the simplicity not only in the infrastructure itself, but in the management at scale, and power savings as well. But even though they're looking at power savings, and we know that the cloud data center certainly can realize power savings thanks to their massive scale, enterprise customers are looking at power savings as well and saying, hey, I want some of these same types of benefits around those savings in my environment. However, that's a challenge because most of these deployments aren't anywhere near the size of the deployments in the Tier 1 cloud service provider environments. And those power savings simply aren't going to be realized anytime soon. So there's an expectation there that customers will, customers have the expectation that they will see some sort of power savings when they deploy hyperscale. But I think that there needs to be clear messaging that, those power savings will be over time, and they'll be stronger the larger the deployment. So that's something that we're seeing there on the enterprise side right now. It's a challenge, but not a major challenge at this point. So if we look at how the portfolios are delineated in the hyperscale land, this is a very unique segment of the market, and it's for certain vendors certainly set themselves up to succeed, or they're working to do that. Dell with DCS, HP with its joint venture with Foxconn, especially Dell with DCS. Dell is has a breeding ground for innovation coming out of DCS that it can easily apply, or over time more easily apply to off-the-shelf versions of hyperscale. Now, with that said, there are other vendors such as HP and others who are placing plenty of resources and investments into hyperscale regardless of what's happening in their current engagements or past engagements, and we're seeing some acceleration among within vendors regardless of whatever their past history was. We think that this is being driven by customer engagements where customers are indeed saying that, yeah, we need something different in our environments, or we're at least willing to try something different, and they are investing. These are customers that have budgets, and they're devoting a piece of their budget to something different. We see this with converged infrastructure as well, although this is a little more extreme in terms of a separation from traditional blade infrastructure. But the news is all good, at least in terms of customers willing to spend. We do see they are willing to spend. And the more off-the-shelf type of server designs, hyperscale server designs that are available and are easily deployed, we think that the faster that opportunity is going to grow. So I did talk about, I talked about some of the challenges. One of those was that customers aren't seeing quick benefits in terms of cost savings, and they tend to think that hyperscale in general is going to be significantly less expensive to deploy and run and maintain than traditional architecture. I think that's a bit of a disconnect. And I think that that's something that vendors in the space are working on and trying to overcome some of these challenges. So when we look at initial purchase price, when we look at TCO, customers have some different ideas about what's going to happen in terms of that overall TCO and what they're actually experiencing. But I think that at least in terms of TCO, customers are starting to get the idea that they'll see savings over time and not so much initially. I think there's some confusion out there as well around software licensing and core licensing by core as well, and what customers expect and what's actually delivered. So a few challenges there. I think that we would expect to see these types of challenges early on in a market segment. Another barrier to adoption we see based on customers we talk to is that a lot of customers tend to think that hyperscale is only applicable to very large cloud data centers. In some aspects, they're right. For a fully hyperscale-centric data center, we would expect that to exist in cloud and almost nowhere else, except maybe a research facility that's running one or two types of very specific workloads that aren't compute dependent, but are more memory and I/O dependent. That I think will change over time as well, especially as portfolios are built out and more products are available. Now, there's another bit of a sticking point that we see. Some of the adopters that we talk to, and these are enterprise adopters, people who already have the servers in their environments, they're using them. Some of them say that, you know what, we could have gotten the same benefits out of traditional rack and blade infrastructure that we got from hyperscale. I do think that as these customers gain more experience with hyperscale, that at least the opinions of some of them can or will change. But I think that there's also a potential disconnect between what was promised and what was actually delivered, and it could just be in some part due to customer. I don't want to say ignorance, because they do have a general sense of what hyperscale can deliver, but lack of experience around how to obtain benefits from hyperscale. And I do think that as we see more case studies, and we are starting to see case studies where HP is working around that, and I think that those types of things that show real world applications and deployments for hyperscale, those are the types of things that are going to help to overcome potential customer concerns around hyperscale. So we did see that those customers who are deploying hyperscale, nearly 1/3 of them are replacing traditional server hardware with hyperscale rather than just adding it to existing environments. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because these aren't, in the enterprise space, these aren't all massive environments like we would see in cloud. So it can just be a few servers or a few racks of servers. However, they are willing to replace what they have on their floor, those customers. And we did find that among factors for traditional x86 servers, customers are most dissatisfied with TCO and energy consumption. So they already have issues around TCO with hyperscale. They have issues with energy consumption. With traditional servers, and they have issues with energy consumption around traditional infrastructure as well. Those are factors that are driving them to go ahead and replace a piece of their existing infrastructure with hyperscale. So that's something to bear in mind moving forward as, if you have hyperscale as part of your portfolio, those are issues that customers are dealing with and grappling with. Complexity is another big one that we see as a huge driver, not only for hyperscale, but also for other alternative infrastructures as well. That's sort of a table stake in terms of customer pain points. And we don't feel that's going to change anytime soon. We also did see, let me skip ahead to the next slide. Before I skip to this slide, I just want to mention that we did find that most customers, about three-quarters of the respondents in our survey, purchase services along with their servers, and so that includes things like support, help around deployment, integration, and so on. And we do think that, we would expect this in almost any emerging hardware segment. The customers are going to lean pretty heavily on OEMs in the early stages to not only help them understand how or why to use Hyperscale in their environments and strategize around that, but also help with actual deployment. Even though a big value proposition of Hyperscale is ease of deployment, customers are still willing to spend to help get the servers up and running in their environments. This is a new type of architecture, a new type of infrastructure, and they want to know where to deploy it, how to deploy it, and how it's going to interact with the rest of their environments. And they are willing to spend around that. One other point I will mention is that customers, we asked about their satisfaction with Hyperscale servers, and far and away customers are satisfied with their overall experience. But again, that initial purchase price and TCO, those are things that again and again did pop up in terms of what customers weren't so satisfied with. But again, I think that over time, the vendors in the space can overcome some of those challenges, and it's just simply about more customer experience and hands-on experience with this infrastructure. So as we do with most of our primary research, we looked at the workloads that customers are considering and actually deploying and then planning for with Hyperscale servers. So we asked customers who are currently using Hyperscale servers not only which workloads they're using, but how satisfied they are with the performance of the workloads on the servers. And if we look at, if you look at this scale here, you'll see that customers, these aren't all the workloads. These are the top workloads in terms of satisfaction. Customers are pretty darn satisfied with how the workloads are performing on their systems. And you would see things here that you wouldn't expect to see on Hyperscale, such as data analytics and ERP. And what this shows to us is that customers, early on are willing to try things perhaps outside of their comfort zone or the traditional comfort zone for Hyperscale to gain some experience around it and see what an alternative infrastructure can do in their environments. However, we don't feel that things such as data analytics or ERP are necessarily target areas moving forward for Hyperscale. However, if customers continue to experiment with workloads outside of cloud storage, outside of cloud hosting, and so on, we would think that there would be some areas of opportunity there moving forward. So I did want to add a few things. We do know that change is happening. Even though the traditional architectures and infrastructures continue to make up the bulk of the market, we see the Hyperscale market as being highly influential. So there's evidence right there in the portfolios of traditional OEMs like HP and Cisco, which we feel are seeing big opportunity for selling Hyperscale servers into enterprise data centers. So we think that enterprise adopters of Hyperscale will have similar levels of influence on the OEM market for servers moving forward. And we think that these design factors are going to be increasingly demanded by customers, even on traditional blade and rack server infrastructure, especially blades. And then on the, I did mention ODMs earlier as well, and I do just want to make it clear that we don't expect enterprises to be buying direct from ODMs anytime soon. So, of course, unlike Google, unlike Facebook, and the other Tier 1 cloud service vendors, most enterprises, of course, do not have their own economies of scale. And I think it's important to keep in mind that enterprises typically purchase a host of services, so things like integration and support, along with their traditional server architecture. So then in turn, through channel partners, there are significant discounts along the way, and those discounts that could be had through buying through ODMs aren't that impressive when you compare those to those overall discounts buying from a package perspective when buying traditional infrastructure. So I don't think that ODMs are going to have a major impact anytime soon, ODMs. We do expect that ODMs will be more aggressive over time in terms of selling direct to enterprises, but we feel that's a longer range play. However, as we look at more designs becoming available through the Open Compute project, and as ODMs create a more streamlined ability to deliver off-the-shelf servers, enterprises that are running workloads ideal for hyperscale will increasingly consider purchasing from ODMs, and these are very, very large enterprises. But that also requires a different management strategy as well. So in a traditional data center, where you'll see specialists overseeing various parts of the infrastructure across a horizontal line, hyperscale is a little more different. It's more vertical, and one admin oversees everything up the entire stack. So for enterprises to be able to facilitate or realize that type of purchase without all the services around it, they're going to need to have that sort of administrative management structure in place. But again, as more of this infrastructure becomes deployed on the enterprise side, I think that we're going to start seeing a change in terms of administration and how administration is structured within enterprises. Just as infrastructure on the cloud side is having, is trickling down into the enterprise, and yeah, it's relatively slow, but it will grow. This is a big opportunity moving forward. I think that we're going to see a change on the IT side as well in terms of how the overall infrastructure in the data center is managed. And those enterprises who aren't prepared to handle this new type of management or this evolving type of management could find themselves in a bit of a predicament in terms of adding more complexity when they wanted to actually decrease complexity. I do think that that's an opportunity for OEMs in the space to provide services and guidance and strategy and consulting around that whole sort of change as the infrastructure changes in enterprise environments. So one thing that we also looked at, we wanted to see the influence of ARM moving forward. And so we did ask our survey respondents how likely they were to purchase ARM-based hyperscale servers moving forward. And as you see here, more than half said that they're somewhat likely to buy ARM-based servers. Keep in mind this is from May. And even, since then, now we've had even more announcements of 64-bit ARM-based servers. We're getting very, very close here to seeing 64-bit ARM servers in enterprise environments on a wider scale. Still a lot of challenges around that in terms of the code base, but customers are interested. Customers like an underdog. And ARM is an underdog here, of course, but they want choice. They want better prices. And they look towards ARM as an opportunity for both of those things. So that is something else that we looked at in our research. So finally, we also looked at what customers plan to do moving forward. So these are existing adopters of hyperscale servers. And the block to look at here is all the way to the left in the orange/yellow one there, where hyperscale customers say they plan to buy more hyperscale servers. 30% of them plan to buy more than in previous years. That's almost double than what the customers plan to buy for blade, rack, and tower moving forward. So we don't see the market for traditional servers changing much moving forward over the next 2 years. We do see the hyperscale server changing quite a bit. That server market, that segment of the market, it's going to grow. And it's going to grow at the expense of the blade market. Again, this is still just a very small part of the overall server market, but it's something to keep in mind. Customers want change. They're spending to get change now, and they plan to spend more moving forward. The budgets that these types of customers, these existing enterprise hyperscale server customers have slotted for hyperscale are pretty significant moving forward, in the range of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, they like what they see, they want more of it, and they're going to spend to get more of it. So with that, I'd like to open up the platform to Q&A. You can submit questions through the Q&A function at the top of the virtual room. And yes, first question, can you clarify more around TBR's definition of a hyperscale server and elaborate what is hyperscale about enterprise customers wanting easy to purchase, deploy, scale, and manage? So, right, when we look at a hyperscale server, there are non-hyperscale servers we see that are scalable. Hyperscale servers we define as those that are highly scalable in terms of being able to add infrastructure very quickly without adding additional management around it or very little management around it, and won't have a large impact to the physical infrastructure, again, floor space, power, cooling, and so on. And in terms of hyperscale, in terms of easy to purchase, deploy, scale, and manage, I think all of those factors play into it. Not so much easy to purchase, because I think that in these early stages we're seeing a bit of the opposite, simply because portfolios aren't mature yet, and there aren't a lot of off-the-shelf options. And if we look at cloud, most of those are custom engagements. So this isn't a shopping cart version of a blade. It's we're still moving along the way in terms of seeing larger portfolios that customers can easily select products and buy them, and then deploy them. And when I talk about management, I'm talking about management at scale. We don't feel that management of hyperscale environments is necessarily less complex than management of blade environments. But when you compare it at scale, and if you went one-to-one or apples-to-apples, comparing the size of a hyperscale data center versus a non-hyperscale data center, I think that you would find customers saying that this is far less complex. But again, you're running typically far fewer workloads, and perhaps workloads that are easier to manage. Next question, do the majority of hyperscale customers tend to be companies with less than 500 employees? I am seeing hyperscale being meant for SMB companies, and that large customers still want the larger converged infrastructures. If large enterprises are adopting hyperscale servers, they are for specific use cases. Does TBR agree with this? I think that's a very good point. So when we look at hyperscale customers, whether large or small, we see hyperscale customers in the enterprise deploying on a very specific workload-to-workload basis. We are not seeing broad hyperscale deployments, even in small environments where a small data center will be completely hyperscale, unless you're talking about a small cloud service provider. But when we're looking at it on the enterprise side and not cloud, small or large, whether under 500 employees or larger than 500 employees, we still see it on a very well-defined workload basis, because we do feel that hyperscale is suitable for those workloads that aren't compute dependent but are memory and I/O dependent. And so you have a very select group of workloads where that falls, and even in very large enterprises, those enterprises, to your point, are deploying hyperscale for those particular workloads. We see that in smaller enterprises or smaller businesses as well. And I'll just mention that yes, we do think that hyperscale is, the opportunity for hyperscale, excuse me, in SMB is relatively strong. And I say relatively because it's still only a certain segment of the overall architecture or infrastructure. But those same types of opportunities exist further up the stack or chain, enterprise chain as well. So next question, where do you see the opportunity for ARM servers in today's data centers? So those servers, again, we feel are going to have very similar opportunities for its competition, its chip competition. So applications like in-memory web app caching, again, where the workload doesn't depend as much on compute, that would be a good target. I think that we're going to see a smaller set of opportunities around ARM for the foreseeable future, simply because of the requirements around the code stack and around the the work that needs to be done there to make those servers accommodate what already exists in data centers today. We do know that there are trials going on in education facilities for cloud research, also for financial services firms. We know that some of those are trialing things like Moonshot. So ARM is definitely going to grow. It's going to be here next year. It's going to be here 3 years from now. How quickly and deeply it can penetrate the hyperscale market in terms of where Intel is, that remains to be seen. But I do think that some of the early efforts here by AMD and SeaMicro and HP are certainly going to help with awareness and secondarily with adoption and deployment and those customer use cases that I talked about earlier. Next question, what are the support services that ODMs are selling to hyperscale customers? So as I mentioned earlier, we do see a range of services being purchased, and not surprisingly, the top service purchased is actually hardware break-fix service and support contracts. We would expect that with any server hardware. But something else that we are seeing are integration and implementation services. So again, even though customers might be buying hyperscale or might be attracted to hyperscale based on the ease of deployment, they're still purchasing a lot of services to actually help with that deployment. They're also spending on things like managed firmware updates and also education and certification. This is a new type of architecture, although it's not highly different from things that we've seen in the blade space. But depending on how it's deployed and the amount that's deployed, we see customers who want to bring their IT staff up to speed on on Hyperscale, and not only on Hyperscale itself, but how Hyperscale is going to coexist in their existing environments. Again, we're not seeing complete Hyperscale environments happening, even in greenfield environments outside of cloud. So these are heterogeneous environments with traditional and Hyperscale, and customers are spending to get help there. So next question, is the interest in ARM an interest in the technology and the applicability to workloads, or an anti-Intel interest? I think that it's more so, and we've seen this on the devices side, it's more so an interest in the technology and some mapping to individual workloads. And it's really not as much to do around anything anti-Intel. I mean, Intel has put plenty of investments and resources into its Hyperscale chips, and it's well along the way on the 64-bit path. And so if we really want to boil it down to a differentiator that's driving customer interest, it's cost and choice. And customers are, it could be ARM or it could be, Sally's new chip. If it's going to provide choice and it's going to allow customers to save money, you can darn well bet the customers are going to consider it moving forward. Granted, ARM does have name recognition, and that's something that is going to help a lot. But customers like an underdog, and if that underdog can deliver, and here we have a new hardware segment, a relatively new hardware market. That's always an opportunity for a new player or an emerging player to gain market share. And I think that that's what stands in front of ARM right now, and I think that that's something that ARM and the various players who utilize ARM are going to seize. Next question, do you see the Open Compute Project initiatives accelerating the adoption of Hyperscale servers and cutting into blade server market share even more? So, yes and no. I think that the adoption of Hyperscale definitely is going to accelerate based on designs coming out of OCP. For the foreseeable future, I think that we're going to see that mostly in the cloud space. And those cloud service providers beneath the Amazons, Facebooks, Googles, Netflix, and so on, that next tier of cloud service providers, those are going to be the ones who are looking closely at all those designs falling out of OCP and what can work in their environments. Now, in terms of the enterprise side, I think that there's interest, but reality is going to be a different sort of judge and influencer, I think, on purchases around OCP in the enterprise, because there's a drive to decrease simplicity. But now you bring in other other rack designs into an environment. Does that add more complexity? Perhaps. If it's an enterprise such as a research facility that runs a very limited set of workloads, I think that OCP can really have an impact in terms of driving cost savings and driving space savings in those types of environments outside of cloud. But in terms of the enterprise, I think we're a little ways off to seeing the impact of OCP on the Hyperscale market. In terms of cutting into the blade server market, yep. When we look 5 years out, we see the blade server market being flat to a bit down, whereas Hyperscale will continue to grow. And we see Hyperscale growing at the expense of Blade. Blade, outside of Hyperscale, Blade is an architecture that's a scalable architecture, but it's not as scalable as Hyperscale. So there's going to be a bit of a replacement happening here, and we see it now in our research that about a third of customers are replacing traditional server architecture with Hyperscale. So next question. What are your thoughts on Cisco's new Hyperscale servers? Yep, that's a good question. So I would hesitate to call them Hyperscale, but rather very scalable. So when we think of Hyperscale, especially around the notion of cloud data centers, we tend to think open. You might think Open Compute Project, and other, you might think OpenStack. But in typical Cisco fashion, the M-Series UCS is not open. It has proprietary ASICs. But with that said, it's still filling a need in the enterprise for more simplified management, more simplified deployment, and I think that Cisco will indeed find success with that piece of Hyperscale. And that brings up an interesting point, because if we look at the Hyperscale market outside of cloud, so the Hyperscale market in the enterprise, now we're seeing something like the M-Series UCS, which is a form of Hyperscale. It's very scalable, but it's not open like you'd see in a cloud environment. But then we will see, and we are seeing, open Hyperscale servers as well. I think that we might see, or very likely will see, separate paths for Hyperscale in the enterprise. And there's an opportunity around both, where some customers won't care so much about the open architectures, but they will care about highly scalable servers, and servers that are simple to manage at scale, and that might save space. And if they have to pay a premium for those to a vendor that they trust, perhaps on the networking side, such as Cisco, then they will do that. Other customers will care more about open architectures. They're tired of proprietary technologies in their environment. They feel that they're locked down. We've seen certain customers who are moving away from Cisco, away from Oracle, and other types of vendors, to a certain extent. These are, certain customers that just want more open environments, want more flexibility. There's also a perception that open architectures will provide more flexibility. Is that always true? Not necessarily, because proprietary technologies can deliver flexibility as well. It depends on what type of flexibility you're looking for and how much you want to tweak those systems or modify the configurations. So with that said, I think there is space for each type of Hyperscale servers in the data center today. So next question. What is your perspective on the implications of Hyperscale servers on data center infrastructure on the facility side, power, cooling, et cetera? Yeah, I think that the proof points are there in terms of the benefits on physical infrastructure, and we see that in Google's data centers, and in Facebook's data centers as well, where they just make a tiny change to a rack, and they're realizing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in savings in fairly quick fashion. I do think that those physical, the benefits to physical infrastructure are far more obtainable in very large cloud data centers. For enterprise data centers that are deploying Hyperscale on a workload by workload basis, very defined set of needs around a specific workload, they're not going to see the same benefits, and I think it's going to be a much harder sell. You might be able to sell it, but you might not have the satisfaction when the customer realizes that they're not seeing those big power or cooling savings because the deployments just aren't very large. But keep in mind that existing adopters of Hyperscale plan to buy more. You saw that chart I showed earlier. where customers, plan to buy more moving forwards, which means that they're going to have more hyperscale in their environments. So I think it behooves OEMs in this space to make it very clear that the more hyperscale that's in the environment, the more benefits that can be seen around power and cooling, and floor savings too. There's hyperscale can enable consolidation. So depending on the vertical, government, for example, that's a real area of interest and something that can drive adoption. Next question. So the $1.7 billion US 12-month hyperscale market, is this an equipment and software market size assessment only, or does this include surrounding services like installation and post-deployment services like technical support and equipment repair? This does include services. So that view you see there does indeed include the services view. And when we look at the overall makeup of hyperscale server purchases, services represent almost half of the typical purchase. We see the same thing on the converged system side as well. So tremendous opportunity on the services side, for enterprises. And we think that that's going to drive, a lot of the overall market share for those OEMs who can provide strong services around hyperscale. That's a primary reason why we will not see ODMs finding much success anytime soon selling direct to enterprises, because they can offer that services piece. So next question, are the survey results you showed earlier US only? Yeah, sorry, I meant to clarify that this is US only. Next question, slide 11, were the survey respondents just enterprise customers or all hyperscale users? These are all hyperscale users. However, it's primarily enterprise. This survey base was indeed primarily enterprise respondents. And the survey sample itself was broken out. About 65% of the respondents were IT decision makers. So IT directors, IT managers, CTO, and the remaining 35% were LOB executives, so C-level, director, manager, and so on. We do think that with hyperscale, and we see this with converged systems as well, that the IT purchase ecosystem is changing as IT becomes more aligned with the business of the organization it serves. So as that evolution sort of progresses, these LOB executives are increasingly involved in the purchase decisions of infrastructure, including indeed hyperscale servers. So next question, for a normal enterprise customer to purchase from an ODM, do they have to order at a certain scale? What restricts most enterprises to go directly to ODMs versus the normal OEMs? Yeah, in terms of the actual scale, I think that there is a general resistance among ODMs to do small scale deals. And because they already have so much work coming out of the tier 1 cloud service providers that it's not worth their effort. But I do think that the services piece is indeed the largest restriction of enterprises, going directly to ODMs versus OEMs. And again, that expertise around hyperscale, it's very, very nascent on the enterprise side, and it's something that I think scares, even though there is interest, and there is awareness, and there is a willingness to even purchase hyperscale. I think that there's an element of hyperscale that scares traditional IT in terms of the deployment and management, and they're willing to lean on OEMs and spend on services to help them get up to speed. And you know, it's a bit of a culture change depending on the size of the deployment. So you know, we know that Quanta is looking for ways to penetrate the enterprise side, you know, whether through the channel or what have you. And you know, they may not sell directly to enterprises. They may sell through the channel, already doing it with some pieces. But you know, there's the whole question of awareness and trust as well. Most enterprise customers have existing lines of trust with their OEMs, and that's going to be their first outlet in terms of asking about Hyperscale and then actually purchasing and deploying.
You know, I'm gonna just...
So next question. When you in your survey say easier to manage, do you refer to just the physical server, or are you talking about the OS and any middleware in the software stack running on those servers? So in terms of the survey, we're just talking about the physical server. But we did talk to, so when we did have a lot of open-ended questions as well to let customers sort of give us their gist of their overall experience with Hyperscale. And I will say that even though that they did say that their actual physical server management experience was easier at scale, they didn't seem to say or indicate that their overall experience outside of that with the OS and middleware was any easier. You know, I mentioned some of those customers said that they could derive the same benefits from their existing infrastructure. I think that some of that plays into that right there, where they are having good experience around the tools on their existing servers. So, Allison, I believe that was we're right at the top of the hour, so I'll turn it back over.
Right. Thanks, Christian. And thanks, everyone, for sending through your questions. For those of you that we did not get the questions answered, we will follow up with you in a separate email. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. As promised, here are all the social media links for you to engage with TVR and Christian about this research. And I would like to remind you that we have a converged infrastructure webinar next week, and we do hope that you're able to attend as well. On the way out of the webinar, there are 3 quick questions, 2 radio buttons and 1 open-ended. How valuable was the presentation today? How good was the presenter? If there's any other open-ended feedback you'd like to share with us in terms of what we're covering, what you find more valuable to hear from us about, or any other feedback. We are using this feedback in all of our presentations to fine-tune them to make sure that the time you do spend with us is valuable to you. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I'll leave the chat function open for another couple of seconds in case there's any last-minute follow-up questions or anyone would like to set up a conversation with Christian about this research. And if we don't hear from you now, please do reach out to us. We'll be sending the deck out tomorrow. If there's any questions from there, please do reach out to us. And we hope to see you on next week's Converged Infrastructure webinar. So with that, thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.